Finally, Sir Keir Starmer is calling for a national inquiry into the grooming gang scandal, despite many victims and their families and even Oldham Council at the heart of the problem calling for one. It's taken Keir Starmer and co 6 months to do what we all knew had to be done. Ironically, the very thing that precluded people coming forward to report the groomers, so basically calling people racist, is the very weapon Sir Keir Starmer used to silence protest against those who called for a national inquiry.
And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right.
How is he making that connection? Hitler was on the far right and was a raving racist. How is you or I or our politicians calling for a national inquiry into what is clearly perpetrated in this case predominantly by men of Pakistani heritage against white girls, an example of people jumping on a far-right bandwagon? I don't see it. What an insult to the victims.
The victims do not need another whitewash, they do not need another cover-up. This needs to be done properly, to a full scale, with accountability, with everything open to the public, and we need to also be looking at developing framework going forward in prevention of these crimes.
Are they far-right or raving racists? Because that's what calling someone that implies. The same slur that police officers say they were afraid of being called, which is why they didn't report the abuse targeted at white girls by, in the main, men of Pakistani heritage. Those who should have known better didn't appear to want to call for an inquiry either.
This government is determined to get to the truth of both historic and current grooming gangs, to ensure perpetrators are punished and to deliver justice and accountability for victims and survivors. That is why we are pressing ahead with key recommendations of the independent inquiry, including the mandatory duty to report.
I mean, she's supposed to be the safeguarding minister. It makes no sense. God help us. Yvette Cooper insisting toothless local inquiries would be better, despite councils suggesting otherwise.
Effective local inquiries can delve into far more local detail and deliver more locally relevant answers and change than a lengthy nationwide inquiry can provide. So Tom Crowther, KC, chair of the Telford inquiry, has agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries where they are needed, and as a first step, to work with Oldham Council and up to 4 other pilot areas.
But not everyone in the Labour Party was supportive of Keir's position. Lord Glassman, for one, he said, "I support an inquiry to get to the truth and improve how all parts of the state deal with sexual abuse of children." Well, yesterday, Keir finally cottoned on, and today he sent out Darren Jones, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, to confirm a mammoth U-turn.
To make sure you're doing these things properly. There are lots of sensitive information, sensitive cases across the country. Remembering that Keir Starmer was the Director of Public Prosecutions when he worked with Baroness Casey to bring the first prosecutions for grooming gangs in Rochdale many years ago. That process has now concluded. The report has been written by Baroness Casey, and on the basis of that, a national inquiry will now follow.
Finally. All I can say is thank God for the brilliant Charlie Peters who maintained continuous pressure on the government, and thank God for GB News. The other day we celebrated our 4th birthday. When others were trying to close us down, we kept going, telling us we'll only last 6 months. They tried to suffocate our funding and, yes, call us far right. There it is again. So basically racists. I've lost count of the number of times I've been referred to as an Uncle Tom or a coconut or whatever rancid term could be thought up to describe me as a traitor to my race for daring to be part of this channel. Well, we will continue to champion your causes and hold our governments to account, whoever they are. And calling people far right in an attempt to hinder progress will no longer work. When something is factually based, we need to move away from the notion that it is far right. A national inquiry into the grooming gang scandal is the only way forward. Right, well, we're crossing live to Canada, where moments ago Canada's Mark Carney met with Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer. Of course, it's the G7 meeting where they'll be discussing in particular the Iran and, of course, Israel conflict. The leaders of the free world all coming together. We're hoping to bring you a speech or some thoughts from Keir Starmer in around about 10 minutes or so. But there he is, that is Keir Starmer in Canada with Mark Carney, who is there, and they are part of the G7. They will be discussing all world issues, including Iran and Israel. Well, it's just gone 13 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. Before we get stuck into the debates, here's what else is coming up today. The Prime Minister has announced there will be a full national statutory inquiry into grooming gangs after calling campaigners far right. I'll continue that discussion next. We'll also be crossing live to Canada, where the Prime Minister is at the G7 summit. But what will be on the agenda?
The G7 in Canada is all back to the world stage. He said overnight to us that Canada is an independent and sovereign country and a much valued member of the Commonwealth. That needs to be said because Donald Trump covets this country as the 51st state of the United States of America. And over all that, the big issue here for the world leaders is what's happening in Iran and Israel. Overnight, the UK has sent RAF Typhoons to protect assets in the Middle East. It is getting very, very tense on a global stage.
We'll keep you updated. Then in the Great British Debate, I'm asking, is the G7 summit a useful distraction for Sir Keir Starmer? And then following that, I'll be asking, is the G7 just another talking shop? And it's National Beer Day. To celebrate, people around the UK are being asked to raise a toast to bartenders and brewers. Cheers to that. All of that is on the way. As ever, send me your thoughts. Post your comments at gvnews.com/your say. Right, let's get some reaction from political commentator Andy Williams. Andy Williams, I am sick and tired of people using some sort of racist slur to shut people up or to stop people from speaking their truth. What are your thoughts on what I was saying with regard to the Labour Party and Keir Starmer?
Well, I wouldn't have used that language in terms of far right. I think Keir Starmer's used the term far right before, and I think he's been correct in the past when he's been describing some of the protesters in Southport last summer, for example. He was heavily criticised for that speech, but he was absolutely correct. There was a huge number of far right protesters involved there. On this issue, I think he was wrong to use that language, and I think it's regrettable. In terms of the issue itself, prime ministers and politicians get criticised for U-turns, but actually the important thing is that you end up in the right place. U-turns are a feature of every government. The Cameron government U-turned on the capacity tax, the Blair government U-turned on fuel duty, but even Thatcher, who famously said the lady's not for turning, Thatcher U-turned on budgets. So it does happen, and we should commend prime ministers who U-turn and get to the right place. Now, my understanding is that this inquiry is important because it can compel witnesses to come forward to give testimony. And if that hasn't happened to date, that is absolutely right. We all make mistakes. None of us get everything right the first time. And I think the important thing is that we now have this inquiry coming.
Well, look, I hear you. Of course, if you are going in the wrong direction, you'd be a fool to carry on in the right. In that direction, it is wise to turn. But this government have only been going not even for a year. And these U-turns were obvious. It was quite obvious to me with regard to Winterfield that was utter madness. If you're going to create the policy, first of all, A, put it in your manifesto, and B, make sure that you have thought it through, because otherwise it looks shoddy and it looks really silly. And in this particular case with the grooming gangs, it was quite obvious that a national inquiry was needed, in particular because the previous ones did not have the statutory teeth in order to get people to be forced to speak and be interviewed. So there was no point to it. So this one is absolutely required. And I do not know anyone other than Jess Phillips and Keir Starmer who would suggest otherwise. So I'm just astounded that they pushed in the wrong direction, and for so long. I think that's actually quite worrying.
Well, I think what's happened is they've seen the Casey report, they've seen the conclusions of the Casey report, read it in detail. They're right to commission that report, and that now they have made a decision, which is a U-turn, yes, but they've looked at the evidence, they've looked at the report, and they've made a decision to launch this national statutory inquiry, I think that's the right thing. I think on other areas where they've U-turned, they've not done the right thing. I wouldn't have U-turned on winter fuel, for example. I think that was the right policy. I know it was deeply unpopular, but actually we should not be giving, and I'm not saying, we've had this discussion before, not everyone who's in receipt of winter fuel is a wealthy pensioner, but many of them are, and those people should not be getting £300 handouts from the state. And we need to start being honest as a country, that if we're going to do all the things we need to do, if we're going to increase defence spending, if we're going to pump money into the National Health Service, we can't be giving 300 quid a year to pensioners.
If we are going to be honest, then why did they exclude that from their manifesto? Because the thing is, people would feel that they've been lied to. So part of it is the fact that it was just out of the blue and they did not put that in their manifesto, yet they launched it almost immediately as they got into power. So they must have known that they were going to do it. So that's the part of it.
Look,
and the second part, of course, hold on, the second part of it is that I agree with you that some people shouldn't be getting that winter fuel allowance, but some people should.
And that's the position the government have now come to. Now,
Eventually, but that's obvious.
I think they designed the policy incorrectly in the first place. Actually, where you've ended up is it's probably going to cost more money now than it saves, because you've had a ton of people signing up for pension credit who should be in receipt of it and didn't previously get it. Plus, the threshold to access this is relatively low. So I think a significant number of people are going to get their winter fuel allowance back. Look, in terms of putting it in the manifesto, you can't put every single thing you're going to do in your manifesto.
But that's quite a big one.
I accept it was soon after the general election, and I was making an argument during the election campaign because it was obvious to anybody that Labour was going to win by a landslide. If I had been the Labour Party, I would have sacrificed 30 or 40 seats, had a smaller majority, and been completely frank about the very difficult choices that were going to need to be made, and I would have put that in my manifesto.
Well, exactly, but they didn't, and that's one of the main problems with it as well. So yes, it is right to U-turn, but the policy was obvious that the fact that they did not put it in their manifesto makes it clear that they knew that it was going to be deeply unpopular and could cost them quite a lot, so they would have done that knowingly, and now they are U-turning. That does not look good at all, and we're not stupid. The public are not stupid.
It doesn't look good. And I think the real challenge that's coming down the tracks, to go back to the point about being honest in the run-up to the general election, is when it comes to tax, Rachel Reeves has tied her hands, saying there'll be no increases to income tax, national insurance or VAT on working people. And that working people term now feels very much like a looming threat for tax rises in October, where that was a cast iron pledge that they cannot break. So if Labour break that pledge at the October budget, that is going to be a huge, huge problem that far outweighs anything we've seen on winter fuel and anything we've seen here.
Well, they managed to squish out of the NI hike by claiming that it was for employees or not for employers or whichever. But hey, listen, thank you so much. Really good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Andy Williams, political commentator. Right.